Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by Farm Credit. Well, this particular animation is going to be very important to almost everything I lay out for you in this upcoming forecast, and it's showing a couple of great things. One, look at the size of this ridge that is built out of Texas into the southwest. I'm sure you saw a lot in the news over the last couple of days and on weather reports of just how much heat has gotten into the southwest because of this. But the flow has gone over the top of it, and it's dove right into the midwestern part of the United States around this deeper low that's sitting here south of the Hudson Bay. And that's what's brought this flow kind of around just like this. Now, look who's finally showed up to the party. See this right here? That is the first time in a very long time I have seen the Bermuda High start to show itself across the central Atlantic. Now, it's a transient feature at this point, but it's there. And this is what's helped kind of bring in the moisture. This is what's kind of delivered these very hot and humid and frankly, some quite disgusting days. But the atmosphere pops on that. And that's why we've had some storms that have finally gotten to this area. And over the weekend, some of the storms, like in North Carolina, were severe while they produced a lot of very heavy rains in parts of Georgia and South Carolina. So this is it. And I'm going to tell you something about what I'm about to share with you with all these other tabs I got across the top. I think that this is going to be a persistent feature in the forecast going forward. That's it. So what have we seen over the last 72 hours? Well, this was through 11 o'clock on Sunday night when I was recording this. And we could see some very heavy rains throughout North Carolina, throughout parts of South Carolina. And finally, some rain got into this corner of Georgia. This has been an area that we've been watching carefully that has been so very dry. And lately, it finally got storm activity into that region. I think it's because I had to come down here. I was down there for a Georgia Farm Bureau meeting. And then when I left, the rain always comes. So I'm going to take some credit for that. No, it's just finally getting the juicy air in place and to pop storms off. But do notice other parts of Georgia were drier, and there were holes. There are holes in this. These are not kind of widespread thunderstorm events, so there are holes throughout parts of the southeast that some of this rain did miss. We've had another problem, though, with this flow pattern, and that is coming over the top of a ridge like this, we get smoke. And so I'm going to show you some satellite data. Let me take you back here. This was the sunset, so this is now going forward in time. So let me take you back. This is what things look like on Sunday afternoon. And this is smoke from the Canadian wildfires getting pulled into the Midwest. And there's a broad area of that smoke out ahead of it here that's set up over the Tennessee Valley, Ohio Valley, the Appalachian Mountains, and it did make it into the Carolinas and northern Georgia. And you can see at the very end of the animation, as the sun is setting, that's what this line is, you can actually see a much more oblique sun angle on that smoke, and it shows up a lot better on the satellite imagery. I do want to point out, we did have some isolated storms on Sunday night, but take a look at this monster in Kansas. This was throwing out softball-size hail. It was a huge storm. The tops of the storm, we estimate, was probably getting around 50,000 feet. And it just shows you the atmosphere is not just bubbling over us, but it's bubbling in other places as well. Now, where's that smoke going to go? If we just look here at the day on Monday into early Tuesday, we can see that the Canadian wildfire smoke will continue to push into the Midwest and into the Appalachian Mountains, and it will be in the southeast as well. So we'll start to see some very kind of lower air quality issues throughout this particular region. So we'll need to keep a close eye on that and what that does overall to the amount of insulation, that's sunlight coming down to hitting the surface of the earth, of course, our crop canopy. Now, speaking of monitoring things from space, we did get brand new NDVI data, and I want to share that with you very quickly here. So I just went out to one of my favorite sites. It's a pair between USDA and NASA, and I've got it set up here where I can click on any state to kind of give us some NDVI information. So we start in Virginia, for example. We see that right now, see the red line? It is almost right on average, okay, just a hair above it, and certainly above last year where we were. From Virginia, let's slide south into parts of North Carolina here. And again, we're above our historical average, okay, and almost right where we were a year ago. The NDVI values in North Carolina bounced around a lot back at the end of June into early July. But again, what is important here is that I'm not seeing this value way in the bottom of the distribution in this gray shading. If we go from North Carolina to South Carolina, again, we're above average, and we're above where we were a year ago. That's this other line that you see in through here. And finally down to Georgia. And this is going to be something I think is going to stay quite high given some of the recent rain. But we are actually at the top of the distribution here as we look at the newest data that goes a third of the way through the month of July. So it's important just to see this. And what I'm really seeing when I look at this imagery is that when you take a look at precipitation stats as well and combine it with the satellite imagery, the one thing we have avoided so far this year is widespread drought or even regional drought. It's been hyper-local, and if you just look at the month of July, you'd notice it's primarily been this corner of Georgia, which did get rain this weekend, that's been quite dry. Now, Florida has been dry. You can see there are pockets of South Carolina that have been drier. But you look at the map overall, and when you aggregate it up to the climate reporting district, we have not seen substantial drought conditions really build for a lot of places. Now, I understand, and I've been told this, and I was even told it again when I was there last week. I know the drought is only ever a week away, which means we have to just stay on top of this to see if we can continue to deliver the moisture. But where we've been dry has been the upper Midwest into the Canadian Prairie. We've been dry throughout the West United States, but this corridor has been open for business in terms of storms since about June 28th. And it just continues to roll through the midsection of the country. And we've talked a lot about the flooding here in New England as well. Now, on the temperature side of it, look at this. I've showed you, for months, maps of average temperature ranks, and it's always been cold. We had a very cold spring, cold early summer, and a lot of heat early. And now all of a sudden, because of what's just happened with that Bermuda high returning and pumping up the heat, we've now seen that the first 16 days of July, especially because of what's happened recently, we're actually now in the top half of the distribution of years. So there's heat that's finally come into this pattern. But take note, much of the central United States to the Midwest, we've avoided it while there's been excessive heat that's stretched from the lower Mississippi River Valley into Texas, and then, as you saw over the weekend, into the West United States, where we were concerned actually here in Death Valley, which is right about where the cursor is, that they may have gotten close to hitting their all-time record high on Sunday. I actually don't know the official stat. I'm going to wait until Monday until I get it, but they did get up there really deep into the upper 120s. That's not a heat index. That's the actual temperature. Okay, when we stitch all this together, I want to show you the latest drought monitor. And we technically only have one spot right here from North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. It's that spot right there that is still on the drought monitor. But I would like for you to know that there's been areas into here that have received a lot of rain. There's been big storm complexes that have rolled through this area, and yet the longer standing drought issues are still showing up on the monitor. But the crops in through here, many of them do look quite good after some of the recent rains. There are smaller and smaller pockets of stress now that we've seen some of the rains come through that area. So from here, let's go have a look at the last 30 days in terms of percent of normal. When I showed this to you a week ago, this particular area was really dry. It was red. But we've started to fill that in, and when you add the most recent rains, it's actually brought these values right back toward what would be normal for the last 30 days. And I look across this whole region, and from this higher spatial resolution view, we do not see large holes where things are missing. Now, thinking about that in the context of where this is going, I want to give you a broader perspective on things. There's been no change at all, really, in the heat content that's in the Atlantic. And I am going to worry about this hurricane season until it is over, because the heat content of the ocean is directly proportional to hurricane strength. Now, we have Don out here spinning around, and I'm not worried about Don, but I will be watching for any subsequent system to form off of Africa, or something to form in the Caribbean, or something to get into the Gulf of Mexico, because the ocean temperatures are primed. And what's interesting about this is that El Nino continues to develop. We'll talk more about this at the end, yet it is not influencing the shear in the Atlantic just yet. And this cooler water off the west coast, while it is partly affecting the pattern, I think that this ridge that's developed right into this area is ultimately going to be the kind of the telltale sign of where this is going to go. So take this map and stuff it in the back of your head for the next probably 5 to 10 minutes as I walk through the rest of this, because it is ultimately the symptom of the behavior of the atmosphere. And this is what the atmosphere is up to. As I start you off here, going through Monday into Tuesday and Wednesday, we have a Bermuda high here. There's a big ridge along the east coast. And if you have a ridge here, and a ridge that starts in Texas, goes through the southwest and comes up the west United States, there will be troughs of low pressure here. And what this does is this just uses the moisture to give us every single day this 30 to 50% chance of getting some storms. And it keeps the really serious heat away from us. And as I play out here toward like July 22nd, or just play toward the 24th, 25th, what do we see? The models just keep reinforcing this ridge. And if the ridge is here, no, it's not here. And as a result, this is going to keep us away from the major drought stress. And even though it's going to get hot and it's going to get humid, we're not seeing the excessive heat and the lack of rainfall. Now, there are a few places that over the next 7 to 10 days will be drier than normal even. But it's not the combination where we get the extreme heat and the extreme drought because of a big high pressure dome sitting over us here. I think the rest of July plays out just like this, with the jet stream diving into the Pacific Northwest, running over a big western ridge, and dipping out here through the west coast, through the east coast. What I like is to see the Bermuda High engaging back in the pattern once again, because it has been absent for almost 65 days. So what should you expect? Well, we're going to have heat advisories, heat watches, warnings, all stretching from Texas through the western United States. The shade of color you see here, this is all going to be air quality alerts, and you can even see that on Sunday evening just to the west of Raleigh. So like Greensboro area here has one issued as well, and that's from this wildfire smoke that's coming through. When you take a look at what the forecast is going to hold, you're going to see a lot of isolated storms. You're going to see the pattern doing this. Okay, just watch. I'll take the arrows off, but just watch the flow. This is through Monday, getting into early Tuesday morning, through Tuesday evening. That's just your next couple of days. Walk back and forth. You see it, right? The flow is coming out of this direction. There's a pump of heat and moisture underneath it. So we're just going to see throughout much of this area on Monday night and on Tuesday, or let me rephrase that, Monday afternoon and Tuesday afternoon, possibly getting into the early evening and overnight hours. We're just going to see convective events. Storms are going to pop on this pattern. And you'll likely see a pretty active sea breeze too. Take a look at this. This is Monday at 1 o'clock. Watch right here. The model's even picking up on the sea breeze storms rolling right off the coast. Keep an eye on it again. This is going backwards and forwards. So there you go. That's what it is. This is just typical summer storms. So what about the next 7 days? This is the newest data from the WPC, our Weather Prediction Center, and it does show that while there's a wetter corridor to the west, the Appalachian Mountains and right here through this area will see the lower chances of getting storms. The closer you get to the coast and to the south, the better the storm chances are going to be here over the next 7 days. A lot of isolated convective events. I was looking at the European model, trying to play this out here. Just take a look. This is for the whole country. If we just walk through what this week is going to show, I'm just going back and forth. This is Monday through about Thursday. And then you play into the weekend, and you get out there all the way to about a 7-day forecast. We could be a bit stormier here and along the coast down into Georgia, but you do notice there's a hole right in through there that kind of lines up, oriented with the Appalachian Mountains, that just could show up drier, much more isolated storm events, and some places don't get anything at all. And that's why the week 1 precipitation anomaly forecast from the European model keeps its wettest here. There will be storm events along the coast, but overall, much of the area is actually a shade on the drier side of normal during this time period. We can also look at this in terms of probabilities. This is the chance over the next 10 days of grabbing another inch of rainfall. And along the coast, see it here? That's where our highest probabilities are going to be. And that'll be enhanced by the sea breeze, enhanced by the local moisture sources. And you do know that some of these storms could really put down quite a bit. But if I flip this over to the chance of getting less than half of an inch, now you can start to see those drier corridors showing up here. You can also see it's going to be drier throughout parts of the Midwest and upper Midwest and plains, and very dry throughout the western United States, including Texas in a big way. All right. Week 2, newest model updates. I'm going to ask you to discount the U.S. model called the GFS. It has been a bit out to lunch on the forecast pattern. You do notice that the newest CPC forecast is drier here, but got a lot of storm activity in this area. And while the European model is not fully reflecting that, it's not full-blown dry in this area. It's actually got drier risks, I think, a little bit farther to the north, where there will only likely be isolated storms running over this ridge. But even when you look out there 2 weeks and beyond, this isn't an indicator of a lot of significant water stress. It'll be a bit drier, but I'm just not worried yet about drought developing at this point. So let's talk about the temperatures before we dig into that longer range. We're back up toward normal. Monday's high temperatures around 90 to 92. This is what we expect. Get into the day on Tuesday, a bit hotter down in Georgia, but low 90s is kind of fits the bill here. Texas to the west coast, that's where the heat is. We have another day on Wednesday. Chances of storms every day here, and temperatures in the mid to upper 90s. And that's how it plays out on Thursday and into Friday and into Saturday. Now on Saturday, there is a frontal boundary sliding through, and that's why we're going to see the temperatures kick down a little bit, but still a lot of temperatures in the mid to upper 80s and probably cracking 90 in most of Georgia. But this is not, there's nothing extreme about this. That's what we expect this time of year. So with those temperatures and kind of a little bit lower forecast on precipitation, you do notice that the National Digital Forecast Database, has got evaporation rates between 1.5 inches and 2 inches over the next week. So there's going to be some moisture pulled out of our crop here where we don't get those isolated storms. Just keep that in the back of your mind. But the temperature pattern overall, this is playing through the next 15 days. I'm just going to slide this out there to day 5 through 10. South of that line, we will see above average temperatures. But it's nothing like we're going to get in Texas through the southwest, or even here through the western United States, which is where that ridge is. We're just not fully breaking away to excessive heat into this area that's long and sustained and dry. It's hot and humid, which means the atmosphere is going to pop. And as we just kind of play this on out there, going all the way out to day 15, which gets us to the end of the month of July, sure, there's going to be some warmth that builds back in here. But overall, I'm not stressed too much about what this could mean in terms of long duration high heat. So Climate Prediction Center does have in far southern Georgia, getting down into Florida, and then stretching west along like I-10, then opening up into the west. There is the slight risk of the 22nd through the 24th of getting some excessive heat in this area. But I think in this pattern, most of the heat stays west. And longer term, that's exactly what the Climate Prediction Center just released. They updated their new week 3, week 4 forecast, which is the finish of July and the first 11 days of August. And while they've got hotter conditions the farther south you go, they expect it to stay stormy. And I can make a lot of sense out of this. And the very first thing I told you when we started this was, we need to watch out for persistence. And you say, persistence in what? Persistence in this, with the ridge staying in this area. I need to have overwhelming evidence that something is going to knock this out and change us around before I'm going to give you any different forecasts. So let's go back to it. This is what the end of July and the beginning 11 days of August is expected to look like. Hot and steamy. We are going to see the temperatures climbing, but the humidity's there and the atmosphere will pop with that heat. What about what the European model says? This is its 30-day outlook. In fact, let's give you its whole 30-day outlook for the month of August. You notice, while there are drier risks in the interior, while there are drier risks here in the interior, we don't see it here or getting into New England. And that's been a consistent theme with the model. Now, what about longer term than that? I want to show you the newest update from the European. And we looked at this last week, but this is August, September, and October. And I'm going to tell you, I don't buy this. See that area of drier risk? I don't buy that happening, especially if the Bermuda high comes back. We'll start to pump moisture into this area. It will be our typical hot and steamy summer as a result of that, but it's going to storm in this pattern. If I show you what the newest National Multi-Model Ensemble suggests, notice how it's got a bit more moisture in this area. It's a bit anomalous on a drier region in this part of Florida, but overall, I see more areas seeing near normal to wetter than normal conditions for August, September, October. And the newest addition to this for that same 3-month outlook came from the IRI multi-model probability forecasting system, which uses a statistical algorithm to kind of process the numerical weather data. And again, I don't see risk of drought. Now, the compounding factor with all of this is going to be where we currently sit in the hurricane season. You are here, and all of this is yet to come. And as I told you earlier, I'm quite concerned about what these ocean temperatures are doing. So I'm going to take you to one of my favorite sites. We've done it before. It's called tropicaltidbits.com. Levi Cowan put it together. Brilliant scientist. I love his work. This graphic down here shows you what's going on with El Nino. It's back up there almost 1 degree C above average. It just continues to go forward. But what I want to do is come over to this sea surface temperature graph. I want to switch this around to show you the western Atlantic and again give you that perspective on how warm these ocean temperatures are. Because to be 30 degrees is 86. To approach 32 is 90. It's over 90. So we've got warm water in the western Atlantic, warm water in the Gulf of Mexico, even warm water in the Caribbean right now. And when you think about that, how warm is it? I've showed you this before. It's as warm as it typically is when we're at the peak of hurricane season. You see, this is average. The blue line is where we are. And like I told you at the beginning, El Nino has yet to really influence the wind shear. If average wind shear is here, the blue line tells you we're well below that. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what this means, high wind shear environments, in other words, if that blue line went way up here during the hurricane season, it would shut down every hurricane that attempted to form. But if the wind shear stays low, that sets up an environment through which hurricanes can kind of thrive. And this just brings us back to some of my biggest concerns. Right now, if a hurricane were to form in the Western Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico, based off of the research of Dr. Carrie Emanuel, this color mapping down here represents the strength of a tropical system from tropical depression to storm up to Hurricane Cat 1 through Cat 5. So you notice that the colors here mean that the ocean temperatures are supportive should a system form to get it all the way to its kind of maximum potential. That's what it could do. So this is what the ocean temperatures, the warm ocean temperatures are setting up. And I want you to stay very well aware of that. I'm going to finish with a quick international update. This is what the next 10 days looks like globally. A lot of storms popping in Central Europe, but throughout parts of France and Germany and Poland, northern parts dry. We're wet here in the British Isles, getting up into Scandinavia. Indian monsoon, very wet. Southeast Asia, the island, the archipelago down here of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, very wet. We noticed that, it's the dry season in South America, but they're having very favorable weather to continue their harvest. Although they're a bit behind, that harvest is primarily behind because of a later plant. But I do have an area of concern I keep watching, which is here in this part of China, which keeps flip-flopping back and forth in the models. But on the temperature side of it, it is very hot in Central Europe. It's very hot in the Western United States. It's hot in Central Asia as well. But what we need to be watching is the temperature pattern here between the Sahara and the Sahel. I've been showing you some of the big dust plumes that come off of the Sahara right now. At some point, these storms are going to start to emerge and really crank and go across the open Atlantic. And that's where we're going to get concerned about this upcoming hurricane season in the next few weeks. So I just wanted you to stay ahead of it and get prepared now. But with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I really appreciate your attention, and we'll talk again next week. Thanks.